Welcome to the deep dive. We're looking at some source materials today, all focused on a specific date, June 13th, 2025.
That's right. And our plan is to really unpack what these sources say about the military clash between Israel and Iran on that day.
Exactly. Using only these reports, we want to understand the key events and, well, what the sources suggest the implications might be.
It seems like a really significant escalation based on these accounts. The sources detail a direct exchange, something that immediately got global attention.
Okay, so let's dive in. Where do the sources say this began?
It looks like it started with an Israeli operation, codenamed Operation Rising Lion.
Rising Lion. And this was early on June 13th.
Yeah, the very early hours. The reports describe it as pretty sweeping. We're talking aerial assaults, but also underground elements.
Then scale?
The numbers mentioned are quite large, over 200 fighter jets reportedly involved, plus Mossad operatives on the ground.
Over 200 jets. Wow. And what were they targeting, according to these materials?
The sources point specifically to nuclear enrichment sites and other military facilities inside Iran.
Any specific locations named?
Yes, Natanz is mentioned frequently in these reports. You know, the key nuclear site, it seems to have been a primary target.
Which suggests, as some analyses here note, a direct hit at Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And there were casualties reported, too.
What do the sources say about that?
They report that key figures in the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, were killed, along with some nuclear scientists.
And Israel's justification, as reported here.
It's framed in the sources as a preemptive strike, the idea being to stop Iran's nuclear program before it crossed some line. Timing was presented as critical.
Okay, so a major Israeli operation described as preemptive. How did Iran respond based on these documents?
Well, the response described was fast, very swift.
What form did it take?
According to these reports, Iran launched over 100 drones and ballistic missiles back at Israel.
Over 100. How did Israel handle that according to the sources?
The reports indicate most were intercepted. Israel's air defenses apparently neutralized the majority before they hit populated areas.
But still, that must have caused chaos.
Oh, absolutely. The sources mention widespread disruption. Air raid sirens were going off from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Ben Gurion Airport, the main international airport, shut down completely. Civilians were told to get to shelters.
Sounds incredibly tense, even with defenses working. But the sources paint a different picture of the civilian impact in Iran from the initial Israeli strikes.
They do. Reports cited from Iran mention heavy civilian casualties, particularly in Tehran province.
What kind of numbers are we seeing in these reports?
The estimates vary, but some sources cite figures around 70 to 80 killed, maybe over 300 injured.
Yeah.
These Iranian reports claim residential areas, even scientists' homes, were hit. Though it's worth noting, not all sources align perfectly on the target specifics.
Right. Context is key. The sources also seem to frame this whole exchange as, well, historically significant.
Yeah, some describe it as the biggest Israeli strike on Iran since the Iran-Iraq War back in the 80s, a major event.
And the political reactions reported seem starkly different.
Very much so. You have Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, quoted in these materials as calling it a declaration of war and promising harsh punishment.
A declaration of war. But how did Israel frame it, according to the sources?
Interestingly, the reports say Israeli sources describe their operation as just the opening salvo.
Opening salvo, that's quite a contrast. Declaration of war versus opening salvo, what does that difference tell us?
Well, it really highlights the potential for this to escalate further, doesn't it?
Yeah.
One side suggesting payback is coming, the other implying this is just the beginning of a bigger campaign. That's a worrying divergence reported here.
Definitely. Okay, let's look wider. What about the global reaction described in these sources?
It was mixed. The U.S., for example, reportedly distanced itself, said they weren't involved.
Was there mention of others?
Yeah, there's a note here about former President Trump posting on Truth Social, claiming the U.S. was informed beforehand, but again, not involved in the operation itself.
And diplomacy, especially those nuclear talks.
That seems to have taken a big hit. The sources are pretty clear. Tehran's nuclear negotiations look jeopardized, and any U.S.-Iran talks seem, stalled for now.
Unsurprising, maybe. And the economy.
Immediate impact, as you'd expect. The sources describe global markets getting very nervous. Oil prices shot up. You saw financial ripples going through stock markets worldwide. Shows how linked everything is.
So wrapping up, these sources basically leave us on June 13th with a lot of big questions hanging in the air.
Exactly. Several key uncertainties are highlighted, like will Iran escalate more, maybe through proxies like Hezbollah or the Houthis?
Mm.
or more direct attacks? That's one big question.
And diplomacy. Any chance it bounces back?
Could those U.S.-Iran talks revive somehow? The sources raise that possibility, but it looks tough. And the biggest question really is, could this spiral? Could it become a full-blown regional war? That's the fear reflected in many of these reports.
Those are absolutely critical questions. And understanding what these sources report happened on June 13th, Operation Rising Lion, the swift retaliation, the casualties, those opposing political statements, it really matters for you, the listener. It gives context for what might come next in the region and how it could affect things globally.
It sets the stage, based purely on these initial reports from the day.
It really does. And that final thought from the sources, the Israeli framing of this as just an opening salvo, if that's how one side reportedly sees it, what does that truly imply about the days and weeks that might follow June 13th? It suggests a potentially long and dangerous road ahead, something to think about.
Indeed.
And that concludes this deep dive into our source material on the events of June 13th, 2025.